his photograph will be in every federal office in this country. So even white folk who don't like black folk are going to have to see his picture on their wall for at least 4 years. Understand the psychological effect that that image of that black man is going to have on them on a conscious and subconscious level. Understand that in every military installation throughout the world, every embassy throughout the world, his picture is going to hang on that wall. We can't just deal with things on a superficial level. We got to begin to understand that things manifest themselves on a spiritual and a mental level. And all of these things are going to be working within the next couple of months. So we got to begin to broaden our perspective of this moment in time, where we are in this moment in time, and how we must use our time to take advantage of every single second. Fourth point I want to talk about is racism dead or in a state of suspended animation. Barack addressed the issues of race in his book, Dreams of My Father, a story of race and inheritance. So he was very clear about these issues of race. The book was published in 1995, 4 years after he graduated from Harvard Law School, 9 years before he spoke at the Democratic Convention in 2004, where he delivered a keynote address. So this book was written before anybody ever heard of Barack Obama. And he laid out his heart and soul. He talked about what life was like for him as a child. Talked about getting high. Talked about shooting school. He's talking about all the things that any young child does growing up. And he talked about how he found himself and charted a course for his life. Again, the issue that impressed me was that Barack chose to work as a community organizer in the south side of Chicago. Chicago was, in the early 80s, and still is today, and it certainly was the 21 years that I lived in Chicago from actually 20 years, from 1951 to 1971, Chicago was and still is the most racially segregated city in the United States of America. It still is, even more so than New York, even more so than New York. If you all recall, in the 60s, Dr. King decided to move his civil rights movement from the South, came to Chicago. He came to Chicago, not Cicero. Cicero has changed. Chicago has changed a lot over the years. Black folk live in Cicero now, you know. But Martin Luther King decided that he was going to integrate community in Marquette Park. Marquette Park was on the near south side, around 35th Street. Black folk, when I was growing up in Chicago, you don't drive through Marquette Park. Marquette Park was a lot like Bensonhurst. You don't drive through Marquette Park. You don't walk through Marquette Park. But Dr. King decided that he was going to integrate this all-white community. And those of you all who are old enough to remember when King was living in Chicago, you probably remember the images in the newspaper and on the television news where there were thousands of white folk, hundreds and hundreds of white folk, men, women, and children, protesting his presence in their neighborhood, spitting at him. You would think that these things were taking place down in Birmingham, Alabama, or Meridian, Mississippi. This is on the south side of Chicago. And in one event, up south, exactly right. And one particular occasion, as Dr. King was walking through this crowd with Jesse and all of his other lieutenants, someone took a brick and threw it at King, hit him in the head. And Dr. King, when he got into the department, began to reconsider his decision, trying to integrate this community in Chicago. He said, now I've dealt with racism all throughout the South, but I have never experienced racism like he was experiencing in my hometown, Chicago. Matter of fact, Mayor Daley, Richard J. Daley, came into his apartment and said, look, I can't protect you in this neighborhood. You know, so if you want to make your point, I would suggest you do it someplace else. So what did King do? He left the South Side and he went into a project on the near North Side. So he changed his focus, but he still talked about the disparities of housing in Chicago. Now, Chicago housing projects, some of the worst housing projects in the world. New York is bad, but Chicago, some of the worst in the world. And I didn't really understand how bad it was. I mean, I knew folk who lived in the projects, and they would tell me stories about the murders that took place within the projects on a regular basis, the rape that took place in the projects, all of the beatings and shootings and stabbings that took place. Our folk killing our folk every single day. And it wasn't until I was older that I began to understand what this whole process is all about. It's really a process of social engineering. When I was a freshman in Chicago, freshman in college, I was majoring in architecture. And I attended the University of Illinois. And I remember that in the School of Architecture, the lobby of the building, there was this display that the senior class had built. It was a display of modular housing that was made out of cardboard for a rat population that was encased in plexiglass. And so I would see it every day coming in and out of this building. And then after about a month into the semester, our instructor told us that the other professors in the department needed our help because the rat population in this modular city had grown faster than the upperclassmen could make additional modular units for them. So they asked us, the lowerclassmen, to come and assist them in making these modular units, because what was happening was that once this city of rats had become overpopulated and there wasn't enough space for the rats to have their own comfort zone, they started fighting each other. They started killing each other and cannibalizing the dead. So after about a week, when we made additional units and put those units within that plexiglass enclosure, the violence went down. The murders went down within this rat population. And so it was about a decade later when I came back to Chicago to visit John Jackson, who was living in a nursing home on the near south side of Chicago. And as I was walking to his nursing home, I walked past the Illinois Institute of Technology. Now I remember, being in that building for a couple of projects when I was working, in the School of Architecture, being in that building for a couple of projects. And then right a block down the street was the beginning of the projects. And these projects, Robert Taylor projects, these projects are about 13 stories high. Each building would hold maybe 1,000, 1,500 people. And mostly it's women, children, no men. Because in order to get into public housing, there couldn't be a man in the household. As a matter of fact, social workers would often knock at the door 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to do a home inspection. And if there was a man in the house, then you and your children would be kicked out of public housing. And so when in these buildings, there were 4 buildings to a block, and they stretched for over a mile. And they were all throughout the city. So as I walked toward the nursing home to see John Jackson, walked past the Illinois Institute of Technology, and saw down the street these projects, that's when I realized that this all is social engineering. All of this was designed in order to destroy 3 generations of African people. Separate families. Separate the men from the wives, the children from their fathers, so that this dysfunctionality could be passed down from generation to generation to generation. Right. And I applaud Barack for going to Chicago to work in this community to make a difference in the lives of young black men who needed some positive male images to relate to. Okay? So, in the book, he talked about his community. Barack lived in the hood, lived with black folk, lived in the neighborhood that some of us wouldn't want to live in. So he's well aware that racism is a game created by whites. Yeah. Whites wrote the rules of the game. They manufactured the deck. They dealt the hand. And then they want to accuse him of playing the race card. How about that? Understand how this game is played. Hillary Clinton can talk about putting 18 million cracks in the glass ceiling and appeal to female voters. John McCain can talk about spending 5.5 years as a prisoner of war and appeal to veterans. Sarah Palin can talk about being a soccer mom or a pit bull with lipstick and appeal to mothers. But when Bill Clinton suggested that the only reason that black voters were voting for Barack was because he was black, and Barack expressed his displeasure with that comment, then they accused him of playing the race card. What is that? What kind of craziness is that? Everybody else can talk about issues that define them as people except us. And in the middle of that, he still is dealing with the issue, simply because he's black. But the reality is, he can't deal with race directly. It has to be indirectly. As the presidential candidate, he can only talk about race in the context of supposedly racist remarks that were made by his former minister, Jeremiah Wright. Right? So let's look at this Wright situation for a minute, and let's analyze his comments and the context in which his comments were made. Since Reverend Wright burst on the scene with his soundbite of "Goddamn America," which was played over 500 times in 1 week, over and over and over and over again. That's the media doing that in order to connect Barack to this minister, so that even though he wasn't talking about race, he went to the church of Reverend Wright, so obviously these must be his thoughts as well. Projection and association. The interesting thing is about Wright's comments, I have not spoken to one Negro, I have not spoken to one black person, I have not spoken to one colored or African American who disagreed with what Wright said. All of us know that Wright was right.